Hi, my name is Clara. I'm an Argentinian illustrator. I lived in Japan for almost a decade, and I'm hoping my experience can give you an idea on what working in a creative field can look like in Japan. In this channel, I'll try to answer some of the questions I've gotten during my years of living in Japan, and I hope this can be of value to those people thinking of making the jump. A little disclaimer, I'm just another random person in YouTube trying to put my own experience out there and hoping to give some insight in topics that I'm familiar with. So take everything with a grain of salt and remember that your experience might drastically differ from mine and that it's okay. So let's get right into it. What are the pros and cons of starting your career as a creative in Japan? Well, I think that if your aim is to have a full-time job as an illustrator or a 2D artist in Japan, regardless of what you might be shown online, which sometimes can be deceitful, your job will largely be like any other 9-to-5 job, or 10-to-7 in my case. But there are some big cultural differences that I've noticed with the West. For the record, this is my particular view, coming from someone who's only just started looking into expanding her career to Western markets. So take comparisons with a grain of salt and feel free to comment down below if you have a different perspective. So let's start with the pros. Small country, big market. If you've ever been to Japan before, you probably noticed the amount of advertisement you'll see everywhere. Call it billboards, pamphlets, tissue bags being handed to you on the streets, the trains being wrapped on advertisement inside out, and so many pieces of paper you'll get in your mailbox every day. You'll also notice how many of these companies have mascots, animated commercials, manga strips, and so many avatars. Well, as you'd imagine, somebody is drawing those. And if you go online and are able to discern recruiters from normal companies, you probably see many of them hiring illustrators and designers year-round. Of course, not all of them will be hiring full-timers or even directly. There's lots of companies who have platforms where you can just sign up and upload your portfolio to their site, and if there's a match for your style, they'll contact you with work. This is becoming a bit of a trend lately, which might undermine the fact that I'm calling it one of the pros. But for what I've seen, there's lots of companies that will still prefer hiring someone on staff than a freelancer online, especially when it comes to the games and animation industries where there's a lot of work to be done. Compared to what I've seen in the West and having in consideration how deeply rooted in Japanese culture, anime and manga are, I still think that there's many small, mid-sized and large companies willing to hire illustrators full-time. Potential hire. Potential hire or potencial sayo is a term used when hiring new graduates and or people without experience. Usually targets people who have growth potential and good human qualities like good personality and wanting to put effort into improving rather than focusing on the current skill level. This is something that I've barely seen outside of Japan. Unless you manage to get a summer internship or something of the sort at a big studio, I don't think that many companies in the West do this anymore. And honestly, I don't know how you're supposed to gain any experience without something like this. Even though the trend of job hopping and not staying at the same job for life is slowly catching up even in Japan, I think that companies here still see the value of training young people and give them some level of experience right out of school when they're the most malleable. Leaving aside the low pay and being treated as the T-girl 24/7, in my own experience, this is still probably the most valuable thing that you can do to kickstart your career. Regardless of how much you actually learn in the job, if you stick around long enough, I feel like this will give you the time and the leverage to move your career forward. Stable income and social security. As long as you're aiming for a white company as opposed to a buraku kigyo, or straight out try to freelance without previous experience in the industry, If you manage to get a full-time job, you get full-time job benefits, stable income, social security, very little but valuable paid vacations, pension, and whatnot. This doesn't mean that you'll make a lot of money, not even a chance at your first job, or even compared to some Western countries. But combined with pretty strong labor laws, it does make it harder for employers to fire you on a whim or to be made redundant. You can, and many people do, stay at a company for your whole life and at some point just become the old man or lady in the corner. But more importantly, as a foreigner without a stable job, anything from getting a mid-long-term visa to renting an apartment is difficult, if not impossible. Oftentimes, you get to work for big-name companies through your employer. I think that this might happen in the West too, but even if you didn't manage to get hired by a big studio, chances are that you'll be working for them indirectly anyways. Many of these small to mid-sized companies act as a middleman or straight out as part of the development team for big companies, which in time may lead you to actually get some big-name IPs under your belt. If anime art is your thing, this is the place to be. This is a double-edged sword in my opinion. By working in Japan as an illustrator, the bulk of your work is going to have to be done in an anime style. This is a great opportunity if you're an anime lover or are deep into otaku and idol culture, since most companies have at least some level of engagement with this sort of IPs. On the other hand, if you have various styles and your style is more Western, the field narrows quite a bit. However, there's a lot of projects going around, so it's really just a matter of finding the right fit. Structure interview process. In comparison to most companies in the West nowadays, where you can go through months and months of interviews and at the end not even get a courtesy call when you didn't get the job, most companies in Japan have a very upfront interview process, which is usually shown in their listings. In general, you'll have your Direkisho, Shokurekisho, and portfolio reviewed. Then an interview with the team and art director will be scheduled, where you'll talk about your technical skills and experience, followed by an interview with HR or a company representative, depending on the size of the company, where you'll talk about salary expectations and such. If all goes well, you'll get an offer and start the onboarding. This process usually takes about 2 weeks to a month, but in most cases I think that you can be assured that you'll get at least at the very least, a courtesy email back in the case you didn't get the job. This, in my opinion, lowers the hassle and stress of changing jobs quite a bit. So these are just some of the pros that I could think at the time of making the video. Let's move on to the cons. Strict hierarchies. Yeah, regardless of how friendly they might make it look in an interview, regardless of their job listing using words as fratto sojiki, friendly kankyo, or whatever buzzwords, Japan is inherently a hierarchical society. No matter how relaxed the ambience might be at your company, unless you are the CEO, you're still somebody's subordinate at all times. You'll still be expected to abide by those unspoken and sometimes outright spoken rules. This is kind of unavoidable. You are most likely still going to feel some level of pressure to stay working or pretend to work past your regular hours or attend those nomikai once in a while. Being treated like you're making excuses when having any kind of honest feedback, and overall just feeling unheard or outright ignored as a foreigner is pretty common, regardless of how fluent your Japanese might be. Depending on your personality, this can be pretty demoralizing. It's not something limited to creatives, but just a cultural thing, and I believe it happens regardless of the field. Perfectionism and unnecessary micromanaging. As a creative, you are bound to work with other creatives. Taking feedback from your art director, clients, and colleagues, and applying it to your own work is an intrinsical part of the job. Efficiency is, or should be, another cornerstone of this position. And I really hope that no art director out there takes this the wrong way, but I feel like this is something unheard of in some of the companies that I've seen out there. You might know this already, but Japan has this reputation of being an incredibly inefficient and risk-averse country. And when you start working at a majority Japanese company, this tends to really show. Same as some Western companies, micromanagement of every little step you take is very often just a way of virtue signaling to your boss and show that you aren't just sitting on your hands in the inevitable downtime of a project. I think at different cases when it comes to perfectionism taken to an extreme, this might depend on the kind of superior you get, but in general due to seniority, regardless of how menial the task at hand might be, there will be time wasted going up and down the chain like a million times. For example, let's say that there's an illustration that you're sending to your team leader for review. This person will review it and draw over it a teeny tiny 1mm dot. Even this will be color review and sent back to you to redraw over it before resending it to your superior once again. Even though the illustration was finished at the time that they added the dot, technically it wasn't you who finished it, so instead of communicating this and just sending it directly to the client, there's this tedious and unnecessary dance of files that just wastes everybody's time and accomplishes nothing. I think outside of Japan, I've only heard of the level of perfectionism and tediousness that I've seen in some of these Japanese companies when it comes to very big IPs like Disney. There are exceptions, of course. I have worked in companies that don't necessarily do this, but I think for the most part, this is pretty much the standard way of work. Long and unpaid extra hours included in the salary. This one I have the privilege of not relating to for the most part, but as it is prevalent in most companies, I'm adding it to the list. The way it works in Japan, as far as I experience, in your job offer, the salary in general will be adjusted to include already around 30 to 40 extra hours a month. So if you look at your payslip, technically without these hours added, you're basically a minimum wage employee. I have heard of horror stories from companies actually making people account for these extra hours, which terrified me from the beginning. But in general, as far as I've seen, at least in the game industry, you won't be forced to account for all of these hours unless the project demands it. But you also won't be paid extra for any actual extra time you spend working, unless this surpasses your agreed upon hours, since it's already included in your paycheck. However, this really depends on your position. Some managerial positions, like art director and such, might already be expected to spend extra time in the office, even if it's just for appearances, and might have some better agreements. I've also seen coworkers who start to be considered for lead roles within the group to be made to stay long hours to sort of prove themselves, which has only ever made me not want to aim for a promotion, honestly. During the last years, though, I've been seeing some changes on these practices. Some companies now have strict no-sabi susangyo rules, which refer to illegal unpaid overtime. This technically doesn't mean much if your contract already stipulates that they're paying you for about 40 hours of legal overtime. However, for what I understand, it does insulate you from having to work past certain hours and on holidays without a substitute date off, so it is something. In my case, I'm so thankful that I've never fallen for a brakukigyo, and since my line of work tends to be more related to pre-production, we usually get more leniency and less time constraints when it comes to deadlines. Adding to this, in the past I've been able to keep a relative sangyo-free working balance by adamantly managing and disclosing my schedule with my superiors and finishing my work on time. But more importantly, standing up for myself and not creating a pattern where it'd be natural to see me working past working hours. If you ever work in an office where the tension is palpable, you might be able to understand how uncomfortable setting this kind of pattern can be. Regardless, I think that this has made the biggest difference to my work balance and actually encourage people around me to do the same. Constant rehash of IPs and lack of creative freedom. I think this will depend on the size and kind of company that you join. Bigger companies tend to be the first line of production and in charge of creating a game from scratch, which will most likely give you the most creative freedom. However, if you're under one of these companies, it's very likely that you'll be constrained by strict regulations and in charge of a mix of boring and tedious tasks. Furthermore, most companies don't like to gamble on new IPs, so new exciting games are few and far between. You might spend years working on the same stuff over and over again. Unfortunately, this is just something that comes with the job nowadays. Your voice and creativity doesn't usually make much of a difference in these kind of instances, and the job just becomes another desk job. At the end of the day, you're there to provide a service and get things done. And I don't think that there's anything wrong about this, but when it comes to self-expression, you might be better off just saving your creative juice for your personal work. Office politics and lack of directness. I feel like this is a product of the strict hierarchies that I talked about at the beginning. Because of the lack of freedom of speech this creates, it's very common that you run into people who don't feel comfortable giving you direct feedback or beat around the bush when it comes to answering any kind of question for fear of embarrassment of making a mistake. This hinders productivity and might unnecessarily cause stress to certain types of personalities. Group messages. This might seem like a small thing to add to the list, but the sheer amount of group chats in Japanese companies is kind of insane. I feel like for any kind of interaction you could have in the office, there's at least 3 or 4 chats for it, and all of them requiring your attention and properly crafted response, all including different people or slightly different subjects. There's even groups for the kitchen and for the bathrooms and for any kind of chores around the office. This might not annoy some people, but if your job requires a lot of focus, and as someone who's not a native speaker and gets easily distracted on notifications, this took a lot of time out of my day and added a lot of unnecessary mental load on a daily basis. In my experience, some of these cons, combined with the cold polite persona that some people take on when entering the office, can sometimes make you feel like even as a creative, you're working a corporate job. Some of the interactions that I experienced talking to colleagues, no kidding, made me feel like I was, without even knowing, working in HR. But at the end of the day, this is just the reality of having an in-house creative job in Japan. Something to note though is that most of my years working in this field were on-site, and I do wonder if my view could be a little bit different working from home and being able to at least avoid a terrible commute and some of these interactions every day. I think that would have made a big difference, not only for me, but most creatives out there. Sadly, remote full-time jobs post-pandemic seem to be fewer and far between nowadays. So these are some of the pros and cons that I could think of at the time of making this video. I feel like there's so many more topics to talk about when it comes to working as a creative in Japan that I might make another video like this in the future. For now, feel free to let me know in the comments if you have some topics in mind or anything else that you'd like me to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.